Hi everyone, welcome to Globant's Career Week. Today we're hosting a panel about accessibility. This is a very important topic for us and very important for all the panelists that we have here. This is because of multiple reasons. First, over 1 billion people are estimated to experience a disability during their lives. That's 15% of the world population, nearly 1 out of every 7 people. And there are over 10 accessibility lawsuits filed every day in the US. So this is a topic that is very important. It's becoming more important for companies to comply. Over only in Europe, for example, over 4 million people abandoned the retail website because of the barriers they found or they didn't find it accessible enough, right? So this is, as you can see from these data sets, this is becoming more and more important in the world. And it's also important for us, for each of us in this panel. For me, personally, I work as an employer branding manager at Globant. I've been working in the recruiting team for over 15 years previously. And when I found the first cases of talking to people who experience disabilities in their daily lives, and I got to see how our products, help them, help them, do things easier, or help them, overcome a barrier in their life, that became a very important topic for me. That's why I joined to host this panel. And with me here, we have Natalia Toranzo, who is a tech manager in our quality engineering studio. Leonardo Aguilar, who is a web UI developer, and he's a focal point for the accessibility practice in the UI engineering studio at Globant. We have Alex Tornelli, which is the VP of technology and head of the quality engineering studio. And we have Fiorella Velarde. She's a tech manager in the product studio, and they are all very passionate about accessibility. So thanks, guys and girls, for being here. And I want to ask you first, why are you here? Why are you in this talk? So maybe, Nati, you want to comment?
Sure, thanks, Ale. Well, I worked at Globant for almost 9 years, and I've been specializing in accessibility for 8 years. And I am here because I am very passionate about this subject. I believe building websites that are accessible for everyone is the key to making a more inclusive world. And I hope I can spread this passion to all of you.
Awesome. Leo, you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you for the invitation to participate in this panel. And in my case, I consider myself an accessibility evangelist. I had the opportunity to start working on accessibility a few years ago, and that opportunity made me aware of the importance of guaranteeing that a product or service in the web is accessible and can be used by anyone, despite of their conditions.
Awesome. Ali, go ahead.
Hello, hi everybody. I am here because me as the head of the quality engineering studio, the head of the quality area at Globant, I am somehow responsible for continuously trying to identify the upcoming challenges in the software industry and making sure that we as a quality organization take the right actions to be ready to face those challenges. So in the last years, I clearly see that we need to do more to improve and adapt our software development processes to ensure that we deliver accessible applications. So part of my job is to be an accessibility advocate.
Awesome. And Fiore?
Thanks for the invitation. I started in Globant in 2013. I remember that my second project was to make a website accessible. And at that moment, we started to think like any other product, think about the user needs, the business need. But when we started to really get to know what were those users, what were their needs, what are the details that you really need to pay attention, and how those small details can really make a difference on those users. And that really make me an accessibility advocate.
Awesome. That's great to hear. So we'll start with a quick round of questions. But so this is for Fiore. What do you think in those early stages when a new project is about to kick off or you need to build a new project, how do you start? How do you promote the creation of accessible content?
That's a really good question. And when you start thinking about a product, you really need to think that accessibility needs to be as part of the entire organization. We really need to keep or raise the awareness to everybody, starting from sponsors, product managers, product owners, or the teams, right? The ones who are gonna build the project, the developers and the QAs. They really need to know what accessibility is. They really need to know how important it is. And in those early stages, really incorporate accessibility since the beginning. Ask about who are going to be those users. For example, when you are creating or you're doing a discovery or what you are creating your set of personas, think about that you may have people with some disability and think about what are going to be their needs and how your product really need to adopt those users and make your product for everybody, right? We really need to incorporate those requirements in the early stages, but also it's really important because that can make you to take decisions in terms of your team. What are the experience that your team may need in order to make your product accessible, but also in terms of technologies and also in terms of user experience. You need to think about that your product will need to maybe change a little bit because you want to provide a good experience for everybody, but also in the stages where you are selecting maybe tools to test or different technologies to create your product, thinking about accessibility can really make a difference if you incorporate that in the beginning and do not let accessibility for the end.
Yeah, that's a good thing, team composition. So, for people that say, okay, this is not part of my job, right? Accessibility is part of someone else's jobs because they may not have done this in the past. Which technical profiles do you need in a project to work effectively on accessibility? Leo, you want to take this?
Yeah, thank you, Ale. Well, actually, all roles involved in the development process take part or have some responsibility around guaranteeing accessibility of a product. And just to put an example, for example, accessibility should be taken into account since the design of the product by the UX/BD designers. Then the BA that gather all the requirements should include accessibility as part of the related acceptance criteria. Also, the developers who code with the best practices and following the W3C recommendations. Later on, the QA team that assure that the accessibility of the product. Also, the project manager who promotes the adoption of accessibility practices with the client, which actually is not always easy. And also the architect, for example, that defines all the technology stacks that are going to be used in the project, taking into account accessibility products. And as you can see, Ale, all roles are involved in some part of the process of getting a product accessible.
That's why we have all of you here. So for people who may find this, kind of, paralyzing, right? How do I get started with accessibility if I've never done it before? Would you like to share your experience of how to get started?
Sure. First of all, you need to get familiar with the regulations to meet because it's your parameter to know how or what things you need to comply and how that regulations impact during your development. And just to name a few regulations, the biggest one or the most important is the WCAG, which is the guidelines from the W3C, but you have ADA, Section 508. Depending on the country, this could have some variations, but you need to get familiarized with the regulations. Then you need to also define which are the tools that you're going to use to verify accessibility. Then your team need to get familiarized with how Escalator works or how you're going to verify the accessibility in a certain stage of the development. And from the developer standpoint, for example, you need to be an expert in HTML and be familiarized with the best practices. And more importantly, you need to understand how the user interact with your website. And as developer, you need to take part in the definition for a product since the beginning, because you need to give your experience around if the functionality that the design team is defining is really accessible. For example, if you are going to develop a new widget, you need to be aware of which is going to be the keyboard interaction and which is going to be the overall user experience.
Totally. You mentioned something very interesting, which is the UX, right? That's a very big part of how the user will experience the website and making sure that it's accessible. So, Nati, how do you think how does accessibility improve the user experience for that person and also for the rest of them that may not experience a disability?
Well, when you start designing your content, taking accessibility into account, you improve considerably the user experience, since your content will ensure that all users can obtain the information they need, regardless of their physical or intellectual limitations. For example, creating forms with clear and simpler instructions will facilitate the usability and prevent users making mistakes. So making accessible designs will also help you to have content well organized and easy to use, avoiding complex information that generates confusions and frustrations for the users. And another important thing is that it also encourages good coding practices, as Leo mentioned before. So it reduces costs and time, preventing making refactors, since the developers will consider accessibility techniques from the beginning.
That's great. So let's get into developers, right? We mentioned the UX. Now, regarding coding, right? Which is the biggest challenge to fix the accessibility of a website or web application? What do you think about that, Leo?
Yes, well, some people probably will say that the biggest challenge is to get familiarized with the W3C accessibility guidelines. But in my opinion, actually, this is not the biggest challenge. Actually, for me, the biggest challenge is to successfully change the mentality of your development team, all the team, to help them acquire enough empathy so they can be able to put themselves in the user place so they can understand how everyone is experiencing their development. Probably the other big challenge is to define a process to guarantee that your product remains accessible, because normally we as the development team, sometimes we take a development that already have identified all the issues and we solve them. And the challenge here is how is it going to remain being accessible during the time, especially when you have multiple teams working in the same development and you have frequently releases. So here you need to define a process to guarantee that the product will remain accessible. And you need to, for example, start thinking in implement some CI tools that help you to do some basic accessibility testing and start defining some process to help you to remain accessible.
Anyone else wants to add anything to that?
Yeah, Ale, I would love to mention a little bit again some things that were already mentioned, but I want to highlight the critical importance of what we have and what we are still constructing. As it was said, we have legal regulations that somehow enforces us to create accessible applications. We have very specific, detailed, and updated guidelines on how to make a website or an application accessible. We have the technology in place to implement those guidelines. We have plenty of ways to train ourselves on how to make that happen, how to implement, how to use those tools and make sure that our applications are accessible. And of course, we have effective testing approaches and tools to validate all the aspects so we ensure that those applications are accessible. What I consider is still, I wouldn't say missing, but under construction is the right mindset, right? We need to consider and accordingly prioritize accessibility aspects while we are thinking about even creating a new application. And we need to be ready to invest the right time, the right effort to make that happen.
Totally. Well, you mentioned testing. You're the head of testing here, so and along with some here in the room. So Is there any recommendation to follow when you need to validate accessibility? What's the first step that I need to take? Do I go to a website? Do I, use some tools specifically? What do you do?
Yeah, I can take this. So validating accessibility implies a great responsibility. You need to validate that your content meets all the accessibility requirements from the corresponding laws and regulations. Something I want to clarify is that most of the laws and regulations from the different countries are following the same WCAG created by W3C. So that's maybe the first step. And I will say that next, you need to put yourself in the place of someone that lives with some kind of disability. So I would recommend creating a checklist that includes questions such as, is my content accessible by keyboard? Can a user with motor disabilities navigate and operate through my content with no issues? Is my content accessible for screen reader users? Can a user with visual disabilities hear aloud the web content and interact with it? Is my content clear and understandable enough? So can users with cognitive or learning disabilities process my content information in an easy way? And finally, I think it's really important to change your mindset, as Alejandro said before, and start creating testing a scenario that includes all users. Once you understand that accessibility is not a privilege but a right, you will start thinking about just one single user, regardless of whether they live with a disability or not.
Totally. So, this is a very, very broad topic, and we could, talk for hours. There's mountains of information to look up online. So this is just like an introduction to the issue, right? But Ale, do you think that, the IT market is moving in the right direction to facilitate, creating more accessible apps? Is it moving slowly? Should it be moving faster? There are regulations that you mentioned that probably push things to happen a little faster than they normally would. But what do you think about the direction of the IT market in that sense?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think that there's no place to hide. I mean, we have what we need in order to make this happen. Technology is continuously providing more and more ways to facilitate the interaction between end users and software, and that reduces the complexity of building accessible software. There are some examples. I'm on like 15 years ago, physical keyboardless smartphones enable the possibility of showing controls dynamically. So touching and not having the need of pressing give us a big power. It's like a game changer to create accessible software. Some years later, the operation of software via speech give us another major opportunity, because just eliminating the need of physically touching something or the product to interact with the software, again, it's a major step. Now we have Alexa, Google Home, Apple's HomePod out there that can be operated without the need of touching anything. So we call those technologies assistive technologies. These assistive technologies that are improving on a daily basis enables the improvement of the functional capabilities of the software products. And there are plenty more assistive technologies, like I just mentioned keyboardless speech recognition, but also we have screen readers. We have software that converts text to speech. We have alternative pointy devices. We have word predictions and many other things out there that really comes here to make us easier to build accessible software. So there are no excuses. We got what we need in order to make this happen.
Yeah, the ones you mentioned, I think, are great examples, and we all know them. But there's some even very minor things that other companies can do, like in the gaming world, making a game that you can adjust the settings, the gamma settings, or you can adjust it for colorblind people. That also is something minor, but for us, but for the people who experience that disability, that's major. So there's probably a million little points that you can do in whatever project you have to make it more accessible, right?
Definitely.
So, any final recommendations for those that are tuning in? Anything that you can share from what you have personally learned working on accessibility?
Glad to be, first of all, part of this team and to hear the recommendation from these folks. What else I can say? But I think just a couple of points. As Ele mentioned, there are many tools. Fortunately, we can really create accessible products and use those tools. But also we need to understand that even if we make our product accessible, the tools, the screen readers or browsers, they may have also limitations, right? And we cannot always fix all the defects or make it every single part of the application or product accessible. So we really need to know that there may be some issues, there might be some defects. Our recommendation is to create a simple document or page where you can document what are those known issues, and that really is gonna save you a lot of time in your future cycles or validations. And also, as Leo mentioned, you may create a product and that is accessible and you're really following our guidelines. But we know that software can change maybe every week. You can release a new feature or new component or something, and you need to maintain and keep accessibility not only in the mind of everybody who is creating the product, but also maybe have a person or a team, or as we used to be, a committee that can really be the responsible to ensure that your team or your teams are not only creating accessible content, but keeping those guidelines or keeping those really things that you already make it, but continue doing in the future. So have a team or have a committee that can really be the responsible of not only ensuring to keep those good practices, but also assessing your web page or your application or that is going to keep accessibility in mind, and we are really making accessible products for everybody.
Totally. And I would add that maybe, well, you guys know more about this than me, but a lot of people listening in may think, oh, but this is very hard. I don't know if my managers will give me the added time or whatever we need to make sure that our site is accessible. Maybe you think you're not able to do that, but from my standpoint, my humble standpoint, the only thing you need is someone to act as an accessibility advocate and start introducing these subjects, these things in their meetings one by one, right? Like, let's talk about these guidelines, or let's add this and that. And in that way, you are evangelizing and you are making that change. It doesn't mean that you need to get approval from 100 people to start making your project accessible, right? It just takes one person to have that mindset. Like Ale said, the most important thing is to have the mindset. If you have one person in the project who has that mindset, he can help others get into it, right? Has it happened to you that there was one person that really was the advocate and they ended up kind of converting everyone else?
Definitely, yes. When we see something that is really good, we try to follow that example. So it is clear for me that all the stakeholders needs to be aligned with the strategy. So that's why the mindset that we are talking about is not just for the ones that are going to be implementing the solution. If we are going to estimate and size a team and try to see about the roadmap of the development, you need to take this into consideration, because if not, then it's just too late. I mean, it's going to be easy to say, well, we didn't incorporate these features, or we didn't save enough time to provide those features, so we won't be able to deliver on time if we finally incorporate these things to the software that we are developing. Well, that is probably too late. So while we are starting from the very beginning, and planning your software development process, you need to consider these estimations, size of the teams, roadmap, dependencies. All of that needs to be impacted by the need of delivering accessible software.
That's good. That's great. So thanks, everyone. Thanks, you guys, for participating in this panel. Thanks, everyone, for joining in and listening. It's a very awesome topic, really, to be part of. So you can ask questions here on the chat, and our experts will try to answer live or with a little delay. But they will try to answer your questions from coming from you who have actually experienced this multiple times in projects. I think it's a great experience, so that you kind of demystify it and you say, okay, it's something that I can do. So take their experience and keep it going and start evangelizing, right? So thanks, everyone. We will wait for you in all the other events that we're going to have in our career week. We have talks about leadership. We have talks about career growth, different topics. So this is just a sneak peek. Okay, so thanks for tuning in.